Imagine discovering your millionaire husband's affair live on camera in front of 50,000 viewers. Imagine his mistress throwing wine at your 7-month pregnant belly while he sits there doing absolutely nothing. Now imagine finding out that everything you thought you knew about your marriage, your finances, and your future was built on lies. What happened to Sarah Anderson started as a simple gender reveal live stream at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. But within 60 minutes, her perfect life had collapsed into a viral nightmare watched by millions. Her husband wasn't just cheating, he was stealing. He wasn't just lying about one affair. He was running a decade-long scheme targeting pregnant women across multiple states. This isn't just a story about infidelity. This is about a federal manhunt, financial fraud, and how one viral video exposed a predator who thought he was untouchable. By the time you finish this story, you'll understand how social media justice actually works and why sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the catalyst for the most important changes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that Tuesday night in Manhattan when Sarah Anderson's world changed forever. Sarah Anderson adjusted the phone camera one more time, making sure the golden lighting from Bella Vista's crystal chandeliers caught her 7-month pregnant glow just right. 50,000 followers were waiting for tonight's special announcement, and she wanted everything to be perfect. "Hey, beautiful soul," Sarah said, her voice carrying the warm authenticity that had built her following from 0 to 50,000 in just 2 years. "I'm here at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant with my amazing husband, Michael. Tonight's the night we finally reveal whether we're having a little prince or princess." The comments flooded in immediately. Hearts, baby emojis, and messages of excitement filled the screen. Sarah's pregnancy journey had captivated her audience. They'd been with her through morning sickness videos, nursery decoration live streams, and countless Q&A sessions about millionaire husband life. Michael Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his designer suit, checking his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. At 35, he commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals with confidence. But tonight something felt different. His usual charm seemed forced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Michael's being so mysterious about this," Sarah continued, panning the camera to show her husband. "He arranged this whole surprise dinner, picked out my dress, even chose the restaurant. I think he's more excited than I am." Michael managed a tight smile and waved at the phone. "Just want everything to be perfect for you and the baby. Sweetheart." The viewers loved him. Comments praised their relationship, called them couple goals, wondered how they'd gotten so lucky. Sarah had built her brand around their seemingly perfect life, the supportive millionaire husband, the dream pregnancy, the fairy tale romance that started when he hired her marketing firm to launch his tech startup 3 years ago. "So here's what we're doing," Sarah explained, placing her hand on her rounded belly. "We have the gender reveal envelope right here, sealed by Dr. Rivera herself. We're going to open it together, live, with all of you. No fancy party, no elaborate setup, just us sharing this incredible moment with our extended family." That's what she called her followers, family. Many of them had been trying to conceive for years, living vicariously through her pregnancy. Others were young women dreaming of their own success stories, wanting to believe that love and prosperity were possible. Michael's phone buzzed again. This time he stood up abruptly. "Sweetheart, I need to take this. Work crisis? You know how it is with the company." "Now," Sarah asked, confusion flickering across her face. "We're about to open the envelope. 5 minutes, I promise. Keep them entertained." Michael kissed the top of her head and stepped toward the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, phone already pressed to his ear. Sarah turned back to the camera, maintaining her composure even as disappointment crept in. "Okay, family, looks like we're going to wait just a tiny bit longer. You know how these tech millionaires are. The business never stops." But as she glanced toward the windows, her breath caught. Michael wasn't alone. A young woman with platinum blonde hair and a figure-hugging red dress had approached him. Sarah recognized her immediately. Jessica Cross, the 24-year-old Instagram influencer who managed social media for Michael's company. The conversation looked intimate, too intimate for a business discussion. Sarah's followers began noticing too. The comments shifted from baby excitement to concern. "Girl, who is that woman? Sarah, are you seeing this? Turn the camera toward the window." Sarah's heart pounded as she watched Michael place his hand on Jessica's lower back, a gesture of familiarity that sent ice through her veins. Jessica was laughing, touching his arm, standing closer than any employee should stand to their married boss. "I'm sure it's just work stuff," Sarah said weakly, but her voice cracked. The camera captured every micro-expression of her growing realization that something was terribly wrong. The comments exploded. Her followers could sense the shift in energy, could see the pain beginning to cloud her features. This wasn't part of the planned gender reveal. This was real life intruding on the perfect narrative she'd carefully constructed. "Family," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think something's happening here that we weren't expecting." The livestream counter showed 52,000 viewers and climbing. Word was spreading across social media that something dramatic was unfolding on Sarah Anderson's supposedly routine gender reveal stream. People were sharing the link, sensing that they were witnessing something real and raw, breaking through the polished facade of influencer culture. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the window. Michael and Jessica had moved to a corner of the restaurant's outdoor terrace, partially hidden by decorative plants. But Sarah could still see them clearly, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Jessica was crying, not the pretty, single-tear kind of crying that looked good on camera, but real, ugly sobbing. Michael was holding both her hands, speaking intently, his body language protective and intimate. "Sarah," one of her top supporters commented, "you need to go over there. Something's not right. Maybe it's a family emergency," another suggested. "Maybe she needs help." Heroin, but Sarah knew, deep in her bones, in that place where women's intuition lives. She knew this wasn't about family emergencies or work crises. This was about her husband and the beautiful young woman who'd been posting increasingly personal stories about her boss on social media. Sarah's hands shook as she held the phone. 54,000 people were watching her world potentially fall apart in real time. Part of her wanted to end the stream, to handle this privately, to preserve the perfect image she'd worked so hard to build. But a larger part of her needed witnesses, needed her community to see whatever was about to happen. "I'm going over there," Sarah announced, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to check on them." The comments went wild. Viewers were telling their friends to tune in, sensing that this was about to become one of those internet moments that everyone would be talking about for weeks. Sarah struggled to stand gracefully with her 7-month belly, phone still streaming as she walked toward the terrace. The restaurant was busy, but she noticed how conversations quieted as she passed. Her live stream was known in certain circles. People recognized her, recognized the drama unfolding. As she approached the terrace doors, she could hear fragments of the conversation. "I can't keep doing this, Michael," Jessica was saying, her voice thick with tears. "It's killing me. Watching her post about your perfect marriage, your perfect baby, when you're with me every Tuesday and Thursday night." Sarah's world tilted. Tuesday and Thursday were Michael's late work nights, the nights she spent alone, preparing dinner that went uneaten, watching Netflix by herself while her millionaire husband was supposedly closing deals and managing his growing company. "Jessica, please." Michael's voice was gentle, caring in a way that made Sarah's heart shatter. "You knew this situation was complicated when we started." "Started when?" Sarah's voice cut through their intimate conversation like a blade. Both Michael and Jessica spun around, faces pale with shock and guilt. 56,000 people watched through Sarah's phone as the perfect marriage facade crumbled in real time. "Sarah," Michael started, but no explanation followed. What could he possibly say? The evidence was written across both their faces, in their body language, in the guilty silence that stretched between them. Jessica recovered first, and what she did next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms. "Good," Jessica said, her tears transforming into something harder, more defiant. "Now we can stop pretending. Michael, tell her the truth. Tell her about us, about how you feel trapped in this marriage, about how you never wanted this baby." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. The live stream counter showed 58,000 viewers. Her followers were collectively gasping, hearts breaking for the woman they'd supported through her entire pregnancy journey. "That's not," Michael began weakly, but Jessica wasn't finished. Tell her about the apartment you leased for me in Tribeca. Tell her about the vacation we took to Miami last month while she thought you were at the tech conference. Tell her about how you said you'd leave her after the baby was born. Sarah's phone was shaking so violently that the image bounced, but she kept streaming. 60,000 people were witnessing her humiliation, but she couldn't stop. This was her life, her truth, and her community deserved to see it. Michael, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this true? The silence stretched for an eternity. Restaurant patrons had stopped eating to watch the drama unfold. Staff members whispered to each other, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would be all over social media within hours. Finally, Michael found his voice. Sarah, let's talk about this privately. Not here. Not like this. Not like this, Sarah's voice cracked. You mean not in front of the 60,000 people who've supported me through morning sickness, through midnight pregnancy scares, through every moment of joy about our baby? Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your baby Michael told me he felt trapped when you got pregnant, said it was the worst possible timing for his company. That's when Sarah snapped. You're lying, she said, stepping closer to Jessica. You're a manipulative child who's trying to destroy my marriage because you want what I have. Jessica's eyes flashed with fury. Without warning, she grabbed the glass of red wine from the nearby table, a glass that had been sitting untouched during her conversation with Michael. I don't want what you have, Jessica snarled. I want him to stop pretending he wants it. And then she threw the wine directly into Sarah's face. The red liquid hit Sarah's skin in designer maternity dress as 61,000 viewers watched in real-time shock. The comments exploded with outrage, with calls to get Jessica's full name, with demands for justice. But Sarah just stood there, wine dripping from her hair and face, one hand protectively covering her belly, staring at the man she thought was her soulmate. 61,000 people just watched your girlfriend assault your pregnant wife, Sarah said quietly. What are you going to do about it? Michael Sterling, millionaire tech entrepreneur, husband, and soon-to-be father, did absolutely nothing. The video clip lasted exactly 47 seconds. From the moment Jessica grabbed the wine glass to Sarah's final question about what Michael would do. 47 seconds that would change everything. Within 2 hours of Sarah ending her live stream, the clip had been screen recorded, edited, and shared across every social media platform. The hashtag PregnantWineGate was trending #1 worldwide. The video had 3 million views on TikTok, was the top post on Reddit, and had been picked up by celebrity gossip accounts with millions of followers. Sarah sat in her Manhattan penthouse bathroom, still wearing the wine-stained designer dress, scrolling through the explosion of support and outrage on her behalf. Her follower count had jumped to 75,000 in just 2 hours, with comments pouring in from around the world. This made me cry. No pregnant woman deserves this. Find out where she works and get her fired. Your husband is a coward for not defending you. You're better than both of them combined. But the attention wasn't just positive. Gossip accounts were digging into Michael's business, Jessica's background, their relationship timeline. Someone had already identified the restaurant, posted photos of Jessica's apartment building, found her full social media history. The internet's justice machine was spinning up, and Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. Michael had been on his phone for the past hour, dealing with what he called damage control. His startup had investors, board members, clients who were already asking questions about the viral video featuring their CEO. Sarah, we need to talk about how we're going to handle this, Michael said, finally entering their bedroom. He'd changed into casual clothes, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Handle this, Sarah looked up from her phone. The entire internet just watched your girlfriend assault your pregnant wife, and you want to handle it. She's not my girlfriend, Michael said automatically, then seemed to realize how ridiculous that sounded given the circumstances. Then what is she? Michael, your business partner, your social media manager, your Tuesday and Thursday night work meeting. Michael sat down heavily on their king-size bed, running his hands through his hair. It's complicated, Sarah, the business, the timing, the stress of everything. Complicated, Sarah repeated. That's what you're going with. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen, her best friend and one of the few people she trusted completely. Amanda was an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate fraud, and her message was simple. I'm digging into Michael's financials. Something doesn't add up. Don't confront him until we talk. Sarah's blood ran cold. Michael, is there something else? Something about the business? About our finances? Why would you ask that? Because Amanda thinks there might be. Michael's face went white. Amanda needs to mind her own business. This is between us. Sarah, our marriage, our problems, our solutions. But Sarah was already seeing the signs she'd been too in love to notice. The expensive gifts that seemed excessive even for a successful startup founder. The vague answers about investor meetings. The way he'd insisted on handling all their finances himself, claiming it was too stressful for her during pregnancy. Michael, Sarah said carefully, can you show me our bank accounts? Our joint accounts? The savings we've been building for the baby? Sarah, now isn't the time for this. We need to focus on managing the media situation. Show me our bank accounts. The silence that followed told Sarah everything she needed to know. Her phone rang with a FaceTime call from Amanda. Sarah answered, and her best friend's face filled the screen, expression grave. Sarah, you need to listen to me carefully, Amanda said. I've been making some calls, looking into some things. How much do you think is in your joint savings account? About $200,000, Sarah replied, watching Michael's face carefully. We've been saving for the house upgrade. For when the baby comes, check your bank app right now. Sarah's hands shook as she opened her banking app. Michael was shaking his head, trying to signal her not to do this in front of Amanda. But Sarah ignored him. The joint account balance showed $437. That's not possible, Sarah whispered. Check the transaction history, Amanda said gently. Sarah scrolled through months of withdrawals, large transfers to accounts she didn't recognize, payments to luxury hotels during dates when Michael claimed to be traveling for business, a recurring monthly payment to something called TC Properties for $3,500. TC Properties, Sarah said aloud. What's TC Properties? Michael, Sarah, I can explain everything. Bummer one, what's TC Properties? Amanda's voice came through the phone speaker. It's Jessica Cross's apartment rent in Tribeca. He's been paying her rent for 8 months. The phone slipped from Sarah's hands as the full scope of her husband's betrayal became clear. He hadn't just cheated on her. He'd been systematically draining their savings to support his mistress, funding a second life while his pregnant wife budgeted grocery money and worried about baby expenses. 61,000 people had watched Jessica throw wine in her face, but they had no idea that Michael had been stealing from his pregnant wife to pay for his girlfriend's luxury apartment. There's more, Amanda said, her voice barely audible from the dropped phone. Sarah, pick up the phone. There's more you need to know. Sarah bent to retrieve the phone, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. When she looked at the screen again, Amanda's expression was even more serious. The house, Sarah. Check the mortgage account. What about the house? Just check it. Sarah navigated to their mortgage account, the penthouse they'd bought together 2 years ago when Michael's startup was thriving. The account showed a balance of 0. I don't understand, Sarah said. He took out a second mortgage without telling you, Amanda explained. Use the house as collateral for some kind of business loan. Sarah, if his company fails, you lose everything? The house, the savings, everything. Sarah looked at Michael, who was staring at the floor like a man who'd been caught in a lie too big to explain away. How much? She asked quietly. Sarah, let me explain the business situation first. How much did you borrow against our house without telling your pregnant wife? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. $800,000. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. They'd put down $400,000 on the house, spent 2 years building equity. Michael had risked everything, their entire financial future, without even discussing it with her. And if the business fails, it won't fail. But if it does, Michael finally met her eyes. We'd lose the house. Sarah's world was collapsing in layers. First the infidelity, then the financial betrayal. Now the realization that her unborn daughter might not even have a home to come to. Her phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. The wine-throwing video had reached 5 million views. Wander Pregnant Winegate was trending in 6 countries, but none of those millions of viewers knew that the woman they were supporting had just discovered she was potentially homeless and bankrupt. "I need you to leave," Sarah said quietly. "Sarah, we can work through this. I need you to leave right now, and I need you to not come back until I figure out how to tell 65,000 people that my viral humiliation was just the beginning of my nightmare." Michael stood up slowly, grabbing a few items from his dresser. At the bedroom door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen," Sarah replied, "and now everyone gets to watch me figure out how to survive it." Judge David Anderson had been presiding over family court for 15 years, but he'd never seen a case quite like watching his own daughter's marriage dissolve in real time across social media. When his clerk showed him the viral video during a lunch break, David felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's mother died: helpless rage. Sarah had always been independent, sometimes stubbornly so. When she'd married Michael Sterling 3 years ago, David had done his due diligence: background checks, financial verification, character references. Everything had checked out. Michael appeared to be a successful entrepreneur, genuinely in love with David's daughter. But David had learned in 15 years on the bench that people could hide their true nature for years, only revealing it when they felt secure enough to let their mask slip. He was reviewing the wine-throwing video for the 4th time, noting details that most viewers would miss. When his phone rang, Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Daddy." Sarah's voice was small, broken in a way he hadn't heard since she was 7 years old and her mother was dying of cancer. "I need help. I'm on my way." David Anderson lived 40 minutes outside Manhattan, but he made the drive in 25. His black Mercedes pulled up to Sarah and Michael's building, just as the first news van was arriving. Word was spreading that this was where the viral wine-throwing incident couple lived. The doorman, recognizing Judge Anderson from previous visits, expedited his path to the penthouse elevator. David found his daughter sitting on the living room floor in her wine-stained dress, surrounded by printed bank statements and legal documents. "Tell me everything," David said, settling beside her on the Italian marble floor. Sarah walked him through the discoveries of the past 6 hours: the drained savings account, the secret mortgage, Jessica Cross's apartment rent paid from their joint funds, the pattern of lies and financial manipulation that went back almost a year. "He stole from you," David said simply. "Systematically and deliberately, he committed financial fraud against his pregnant wife. But we're married. Isn't it technically his money too? Not when he's using deception to hide major financial decisions that affect both of you? Not when he's diverting marital assets to support an extramarital relationship? Sarah, this isn't just infidelity. This is criminal." David had prosecuted financial fraud cases before becoming a judge. He recognized the patterns, the escalating deception, the way perpetrators always believed they could manage the situation until it spiraled beyond their control. "What are my options?" Sarah asked. "Immediate asset protection, emergency custody provisions, criminal charges if you want to pursue them." David pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney. We're going to freeze everything Michael has access to until we can sort out what's legitimate business expense versus what's theft. Daddy, I don't want to be vindictive. I just want to be safe, and I want my daughter to be safe. Sometimes safety requires being what other people call vindictive." David's attorney, Patricia Walsh, arrived within an hour. She was a formidable woman who specialized in high-asset divorces and financial fraud cases. She'd seen the viral video, done preliminary research on Michael's business structure. "Sarah, we need to act fast," Patricia explained. "Your husband's company is built on investor funding and loans. If this scandal affects his ability to secure additional rounds of funding, the whole thing could collapse. We need to separate your personal assets from his business debts before that happens." "Is that legal?" Protecting yourself from financial fraud is always legal, but we need documentation, and we need to move quickly. While Patricia began paperwork for emergency asset protection, David's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Judge Anderson, this is Amanda Chen, Sarah's friend. I'm an investigative journalist, and I think you need to know what else I've discovered about Michael Sterling." "I'm listening." "He's done this before? Different city, different woman? Portland, Oregon. 2 years before he met Sarah. A woman named Rebecca Martinez. also in marketing, also got pregnant, also discovered financial irregularities right before their wedding. David felt his blood pressure rising. What happened to Rebecca? Miscarriage at 6 months. Stress-induced. According to her medical records, Michael disappeared, relocated to New York, started over completely. The pattern was becoming clear. Michael Sterling wasn't just a cheating husband who'd made poor financial decisions. He was a serial predator who targeted successful women, drained their resources, and abandoned them when the situation became complicated. Amanda, I need you to document everything you can find about Rebecca Martinez. We may need her testimony. Sarah looked up from the legal documents Patricia was preparing. There was another woman, another pregnancy, another financial scheme, David confirmed. And when things got complicated, Michael simply disappeared and started over. But I'm 7 months pregnant. He can't just disappear. He can try, Patricia interjected. Men like this often attempt to abandon pregnant women right before birth, claiming they're not ready for fatherhood. It's a way to avoid child support and ongoing responsibility. Sarah's hands moved protectively to her belly. He wouldn't do that. Sarah, David said gently, 24 hours ago you thought he wouldn't steal your savings to pay for his girlfriend's apartment. We need to assume the worst and hope for better. Patricia's paralegal arrived with temporary restraining orders and emergency asset freezing paperwork. Sarah, once we file these, Michael won't be able to access your joint accounts, sell any shared property, or make major financial decisions without court approval. What about his business, his investors? His business problems are his business problems, David said firmly. Your responsibility is to your daughter and your own financial security. Sarah's phone had been buzzing constantly with media requests, interview offers, and messages of support. The wine-throwing video was approaching 10 million views across all platforms. Sarah Anderson had become a reluctant symbol of financial abuse and pregnancy vulnerability. There's something else, Patricia said, reviewing her notes. Michael took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, $500,000, with him as the sole beneficiary. The room went silent. That's not necessarily unusual for married couples, Patricia continued, but combined with the financial fraud and the pattern of behavior with previous partners, it raises questions. What kind of questions? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Questions about whether Michael views you as more valuable to him dead than divorced? David said bluntly. Sarah felt the baby kick strongly, as if responding to the tension in the room. She was 7 months pregnant, potentially homeless, married to a man who'd systematically stolen from her and possibly viewed her death as financially beneficial. I want him arrested, Sarah said quietly. Sarah, think about this carefully, Patricia cautioned. Criminal charges will make this very public, very ugly. It's already public and ugly. 10 million people watched his girlfriend throw wine at his pregnant wife while he did nothing. At least now they'll know the whole truth. David smiled grimly. His daughter was finding her strength, transforming from victim to survivor. Then let's make sure justice is served properly, he said. Patricia, file everything. Amanda, publish your investigation. Sarah, tell your story the way you want it told. And Michael is about to discover that actions have consequences, David replied, especially when you mess with a federal judge's pregnant daughter. Michael Sterling's world had been unraveling for 6 hours, but he still believed he could manage the situation. In his experience, most problems could be solved with the right combination of money, charm, and strategic planning, even this problem. He sat in Jessica Cross's Tribeca apartment, the same apartment Sarah now knew he'd been paying for with stolen savings, trying to coordinate damage control across multiple fronts. The board is meeting tomorrow morning, he told Jessica, pacing her living room while she watched the wine-throwing video's view count climb toward 12 million. I need to present this as a private marital issue that won't affect business operations. Michael, your wife has 68,000 followers who now hate me, and the video is trending worldwide. How exactly is this not affecting business operations? Jessica was right to be worried. Her own social media accounts were being flooded with negative comments. Someone had identified her full name, her apartment building, even her parents' address in Ohio. The internet's justice machine had turned its attention to the woman who'd thrown wine at a pregnant woman, and the results were swift and brutal. "We'll weather this," Michael insisted. "These social media storms blow over quickly. In a week, everyone will be focused on some other drama." But Michael's phone kept ringing with calls he couldn't ignore. His lead investor, Richard Park, had been trying to reach him for 3 hours. "Michael, we need to talk immediately." Richard's voice was ice cold when Michael finally answered. "The board has been in emergency session since this afternoon." "Richard, I understand there are concerns about the personal situation, but I want to assure you that this won't impact our Q4 targets or the Series B funding round." "Michael, your personal situation involves stealing money from your pregnant wife to pay for your girlfriend's apartment. How exactly does that not impact our assessment of your character and judgment?" The words hit Michael like a physical blow. Somehow Richard already knew about the financial details that Sarah had only discovered hours ago. "I don't know what you've been told, but there are always two sides to every story. The side I'm interested in is the side where our CEO has been using company credit cards to pay for personal expenses related to an extramarital affair. The side where our CEO took out an $800,000 loan against personal assets without disclosing the financial risk to company operations." Michael felt the walls closing in. His company credit card usage hadn't been technically illegal. Many startup CEOs used company funds for personal expenses that were later reconciled. But in light of the current scandal, every financial decision he'd made would be scrutinized and reframed. "Richard, let me explain the business rationale behind those decisions." "There is no business rationale for paying your girlfriend's rent." "Michael, there is no business rationale for using company funds to book hotel rooms for personal romantic getaways while your pregnant wife thinks you are at business conferences." Michael realized that someone had done extensive research into his financial history. Someone with access to detailed records and the expertise to trace money flows across multiple accounts. "Who's been looking into my finances?" "People with a lot more resources than you have." "Michael, your wife's father is a federal judge. Did you think he'd just sit back and watch his pregnant daughter get humiliated on viral video without taking action?" "Judge David Anderson." Michael had always been slightly intimidated by Sarah's father, but he'd assumed their relationship was cordial enough that personal matters would stay personal. "The board is voting tonight," Richard continued. "By tomorrow morning, you'll either be retained as CEO with significant oversight and restrictions, or you'll be removed entirely. You can't remove me. I built this company from nothing. You built this company with investor money. Michael, investor money that you've been misusing to fund your personal life. We absolutely can remove you, and we're prepared to do so." Michael hung up and stared at Jessica, who'd been listening to the entire conversation. "They're going to fire you, aren't they?" Jessica asked. "They're going to try." "Michael, maybe we should think about damage control. Maybe I should issue some kind of apology. Say the wine throwing was a moment of poor judgment." "No," Michael said firmly. "Any apology from you implies wrongdoing on my part. We stick to the story that this is a private marital matter blown out of proportion by social media." But even as he said it, Michael knew the story was slipping away from his control. Sarah had the sympathy of millions of viewers, the support of her powerful father, and apparently access to financial information that could destroy him. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Michael, this is Amanda Chen, Sarah's friend. We need to talk immediately. I think you'll want to see what I've discovered about your history before it goes public." Michael's blood ran cold. Amanda Chen was an investigative journalist. If she'd been digging into his background, she might have found Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca had been a mistake, a previous relationship that ended badly when business pressures and personal complications became overwhelming. But Rebecca had been 2 years ago, in a different city, with different circumstances. No one in New York knew about Rebecca, except apparently Amanda Chen. Michael called the number Amanda had texted from. "Amanda, I understand you've been researching some things. I'd like the opportunity to provide context before you publish anything that might be incomplete or misleading." "Michael, let's cut through the pretense. I know about Rebecca Martinez. I know about the pregnancy, the financial irregularities, the sudden disappearance when things got complicated. I know you've done this before." Michael's worst fears were being confirmed. Rebecca was a completely different situation. Different how different because she miscarried from stress before she could expose your financial fraud. Different because she didn't have a viral video to document your character. I never intended for anyone to get hurt, but people did get hurt. Michael, Rebecca lost her baby and her financial security. Now Sarah's at risk of losing everything too. Unless you think the pattern is just coincidence. Michael realized he was trapped. Amanda had evidence of a pattern of behavior that would destroy any remaining credibility he had with investors, business partners, or even his own family. What do you want? I want you to do the right thing. Come clean about the financial fraud. Make restitution to Sarah for the money you've stolen. Take responsibility for your actions. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning, the entire internet gets to learn about Rebecca Martinez and your pattern of targeting successful women, getting them pregnant, stealing their money, and abandoning them when the situation becomes inconvenient. Michael hung up and looked at Jessica, who was staring at her phone with a horrified expression. Michael, someone just posted my full address on Twitter, along with photos of me arriving at this building. There are people outside. Michael moved to the window and looked down at the street. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, holding phones, taking pictures of the building entrance. Someone was live streaming from the sidewalk, narrating Jessica's building security and speculating about which apartment was hers. We need to leave, Jessica said, panic creeping into her voice. Where would we go? I don't know, but we can't stay here. Michael's phone rang with another call from Richard Park. Michael, the board voted. You're out. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building tomorrow morning to collect your personal items. You can't do this without cause. We have cause. Misuse of company funds, undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, and conduct detrimental to company reputation. Our legal team says it's airtight. Michael felt the last piece of his carefully constructed life slip away. No job, no income. $800,000 in debt secured by a house that was half owned by a wife who now hated him. There's more, Richard continued. We're conducting a full audit of company finances. If we find evidence of criminal activity, we'll be turning it over to authorities. Richard, please, I built this company. It's my life's work. Your life's work was built on other people's money. Michael, money you've been stealing to fund affairs while your pregnant wife budgeted grocery expenses. The call ended, leaving Michael alone with Jessica in an apartment he could no longer afford, surrounded by people who wanted to see him destroyed, facing financial and criminal consequences he'd never imagined possible. Michael, Jessica said quietly, I think I'm pregnant. The words hit him like a physical blow, history repeating itself in the worst possible way. How is that possible? You said you were on birth control. Birth control isn't 100% effective. Michael stared at the woman he'd been having an affair with, the woman who'd just potentially given him a second unborn child, while his first unborn child's mother was discovering the scope of his financial betrayal. Jessica, the timing of this couldn't be worse. For you or for me? Michael looked out the window at the crowd of people documenting his life's collapse in real time, then at Jessica, who was carrying what might be his child, then at his phone, which was buzzing with more calls from lawyers, reporters, and financial institutions. For everyone, he said quietly. This is going to be bad for everyone. At 2 a.m, Sarah Anderson sat in her father's study, surrounded by legal documents and printouts of social media coverage, when her phone rang with a call that would complete her emotional destruction. The caller ID showed Jessica Cross's number. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Jessica's voice was small, scared, nothing like the confident woman who'd thrown wine 12 hours earlier. Something Michael doesn't know I'm calling about. I don't want to talk to you. Please, just listen. I'm not calling to apologize or make excuses. I'm calling because you deserve to know the truth before you make decisions about your future. Against her better judgment, Sarah stayed on the line. I'm pregnant too. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been mentally preparing for financial ruin, public humiliation, even criminal charges against her husband. But somehow, she hadn't prepared for this. How long have you known? I found out 3 days ago. Michael doesn't know yet. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, some last vestige of hope that her marriage might somehow be salvaged. 3 days ago, Sarah repeated. You knew you might be pregnant when you threw wine at me. I was angry. I was scared. I thought if I could just force him to choose, to finally leave you, then maybe we could figure things out together. By assaulting his pregnant wife, by making him stop living a lie. Sarah looked around her father's study, at the law books and legal precedents that had governed his career, and realized that there was no precedent for this situation. No legal framework for discovering that your millionaire husband had not only stolen your savings and risked your home to fund an affair, but had also potentially impregnated his mistress. Jessica, why are you calling me? What do you want? I want you to know that I understand now. What Michael did to you, what he did to us both. He promised me that your marriage was over, that you were staying together just for convenience and the baby. He said you didn't love each other anymore. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. I'm 24. Sarah, I thought I was in love with a successful older man who was going to leave his loveless marriage for me. I know how that sounds now. Sarah's exhaustion was overwhelming. She'd been processing betrayals for 12 hours straight, and now there was another layer, another complication that made everything infinitely worse. Jessica, I can't do this. I can't be your therapist or your confessor. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I just discovered that my entire life is built on lies. There's more you need to know. More. About Rebecca Martinez. Sarah had heard the name from Amanda's investigation, but the details were still unclear. Michael got Rebecca pregnant too, 2 years ago, in Portland. She was a marketing executive, just like you were. He used the same playbook, the supportive boyfriend, the promises of a future together, the gradual financial integration. What happened to her? She lost the baby at 6 months. Stress-induced complications. Michael disappeared 2 weeks later, moved to New York, started completely over. Sarah felt dizzy. He's done this before. Exactly this. Rebecca tried to pursue legal action, but Michael had been careful to structure everything in ways that were technically legal. She couldn't prove fraud, couldn't prove deliberate abandonment. He just vanished. And you think he's planning to do the same thing now. I think Michael always has an exit strategy. I think he keeps women in compartments, managing multiple relationships until one becomes too complicated. Then he moves on to the next city, the next opportunity. Sarah realized that Jessica was right. Michael's behavior wasn't the impulsive actions of a man having a midlife crisis. It was a pattern, a systematic approach to using women for financial and emotional support while maintaining the flexibility to disappear when situations became inconvenient. Jessica, if you're pregnant, you need to protect yourself. Get your own lawyer. Document everything. Make sure you're not left with nothing like Rebecca was. I don't want his money, Sarah. I just want to do the right thing. The right thing is making sure 2 children aren't left without support because their father is a sociopath. Sarah hung up the phone and stared at the wall of legal books, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. Her husband was a serial predator who targeted successful women, drained their resources, and abandoned them when pregnancy made situations complicated. She was 7 months pregnant with potentially no financial security, no home equity, and no idea whether Michael would simply disappear like he had with Rebecca. But worse than all of that was the realization that her daughter would grow up knowing that her father had abandoned not just one pregnant woman, but potentially 3. Sarah's father appeared in the study doorway, having heard the phone conversation. How much of that did you hear? Sarah asked. Enough to know that we're dealing with something much more serious than infidelity and financial fraud. Daddy, what if he just leaves? What if he takes whatever money he can access and disappears like he did with Rebecca? Then we track him down and make sure he faces consequences for his actions. But what if we can't? What if he's already planned his exit strategy? Judge Anderson sat down beside his daughter, looking every one of his 60 years. Sarah, I've seen a lot of predators in my courtroom. The sophisticated ones, the ones who think they're smarter than the system, they all make the same mistake eventually. What mistake? They underestimate their victims. They assume that because they've gotten away with something before, they'll keep getting away with it. But every time they repeat their pattern, they leave more evidence, create more witnesses, make more enemies. You think Michael's made that mistake? I think Michael has no idea who he's dealing with. He married the daughter of a federal judge. He stole money that can be traced. He created a viral video that millions of people have seen. And now he's facing two pregnant women who have every reason to make sure he's held accountable. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Sarah, I need you to see something. Michael's company just filed for bankruptcy. Emergency filing 2 hours ago. The final piece of Michael's exit strategy was falling into place. File for bankruptcy to eliminate business debts, liquidate whatever assets he could access, and disappear before creditors or family court could freeze his finances. He's running, Sarah said quietly. Then we better make sure he doesn't get far. Judge Anderson reached for his phone and began making calls that would wake up lawyers, financial investigators, and law enforcement contacts across multiple jurisdictions. David Anderson here. I need emergency asset freezing orders, and I need them tonight. My daughter's husband is attempting to flee jurisdiction while she's 7 months pregnant and facing financial fraud charges. Sarah listened to her father coordinate a legal response that would span multiple states and potentially federal jurisdiction, and realized that Michael Sterling had made a crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that pregnant women were vulnerable, isolated, easy to abandon. He'd never encountered a pregnant woman whose father was a federal judge with 30 years of law enforcement contacts and an absolute dedication to protecting his family. Daddy, Sarah said as he finished his calls, what happens now? Now we make sure Michael Sterling learns that there are consequences for his choices, and we make sure your daughter grows up knowing that her family fought for her before she was even born. By 6 in the morning, Michael Sterling had vanished. The doorman at Jessica Cross's Tribeca building reported that Michael had left through the service entrance at 4:30 a.m., carrying 2 large suitcases and avoiding the crowd of onlookers still gathered on the street. Building security cameras showed him getting into a black SUV with temporary license plates. Judge David Anderson had been awake all night, coordinating with law enforcement contacts across 3 states and the Federal Financial Crimes Division. What had started as a family crisis was rapidly becoming a multi-jurisdictional manhunt. He withdrew $47,000 from various ATMs across the city between midnight and 4 a.m. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos reported to the emergency task force that had assembled in Judge Anderson's study. Used multiple credit cards that are now flagged, but he got enough cash to fund several weeks of travel. Any indication of destination? Asked Detective Ray Murphy from the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. Flight records show Michael Sterling purchased a ticket to Denver under his own name, departing this morning at 8:15, but he never showed up for the flight. Sarah sat in the corner of her father's study, feeling like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. 12 hours ago, she'd been planning a gender reveal livestream. Now she was the center of a multi-state manhunt for a husband she was beginning to understand she'd never really known. Amanda Chen arrived with her laptop and a stack of printed documents. I've been in contact with Rebecca Martinez, Amanda announced to the room. She's agreed to provide testimony about Michael's pattern of behavior, but she also gave me information about his escape methodology. Escape methodology? Agent Santos asked. Michael doesn't just disappear randomly. He creates new identities, establishes credit histories, builds financial networks in different cities months before he needs them. Amanda opened her laptop and displayed a complex web of connections across multiple states. Rebecca helped me trace some of his financial footprints, shell companies in 3 different states, bank accounts established under variations of his name, even property rentals paid months in advance. You think he's been planning this for months? Sarah asked. I think Michael has been planning this since the day he married you, Amanda replied grimly. The second mortgage on your house, the business loan structure, even the timing of Jessica's pregnancy, it's all designed to create maximum chaos while he extracts maximum resources and disappears. Judge Anderson studied the financial web Amanda had uncovered. Show me the property rentals. Amanda highlighted 3 locations: a cabin in Colorado, an apartment in Austin, and a house in Portland, the same city where Rebecca Martinez lived. He's going back to Portland, Detective Murphy concluded. Familiar territory, existing infrastructure. And Rebecca, Sarah added quietly. He's going back to the scene of his previous crime. Agent Santos was coordinating with federal marshals in Oregon while local law enforcement prepared to execute search warrants on Michael's known properties. But Sarah's phone rang with a call that would change the entire direction of the investigation. Sarah, this is Jessica. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, But Michael just called. Sarah put the phone on speaker so the law enforcement team could hear. What did he say? He wants me to meet him in Portland. He says he has a plan to fix everything, that we can start over, that the baby changes everything. Did you agree to meet him? I told him I needed time to think about it. But Sarah, I think he's planning something. He didn't sound like the Michael I knew. He sounded desperate, dangerous. Agent Santos leaned forward. Jessica, this is FBI Special Agent Maria Santos. We need you to call Michael back and arrange to meet him. Can you do that? You want me to be bait? We want to catch him before he disappears completely and leaves two pregnant women with no financial support and no legal recourse. Sarah looked at Jessica's number on her phone screen and made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Jessica, I'll go with you. Absolutely not, Judge Anderson said immediately. Sarah, you're 7 months pregnant, Agent Santos added. This is not a situation for civilians. Michael doesn't know that Jessica called me. He doesn't know we're cooperating. If Jessica shows up alone, he might suspect a trap. But if we both show up, if he thinks we're fighting over him, he'll believe it. Detective Murphy was shaking his head. Too dangerous. This is my life, Sarah said firmly. My marriage, my money, my daughter's future. I'm not sitting in my father's study while other people decide how this ends. Amanda was nodding slowly. It actually makes sense. Michael's ego won't let him believe that Sarah and Jessica could work together. He'll think Jessica betrayed Sarah by calling him, and Sarah tracked her down to confront them both. The psychological profile fits, Agent Santos admitted reluctantly. Men like Michael assume women will compete for their attention rather than cooperate against them. Judge Anderson looked at his daughter with the expression of a man torn between protecting his child and respecting her autonomy. Sarah, if we do this, you're surrounded by federal agents, local law enforcement, and more surveillance than a presidential visit. You don't get within 50 yards of Michael without backup. I understand. And if anything goes wrong, anything at all, you follow law enforcement instructions without question. I understand. Sarah looked around the room at the lawyers, agents, and detectives who'd assembled to help her, and realized that she was about to do something that would either bring Michael Sterling to justice or put her and her unborn daughter in mortal danger. Jessica, Sarah said into the phone, call him back. Tell him you want to meet in Portland, but that I found out about the call and I'm coming too. Tell him I'm furious and I want answers. What if he doesn't buy it? He'll buy it, Amanda said confidently, because it fits his narrative that women are irrational and emotional. He'll think he can manipulate the situation to his advantage. And that's when we get him, Agent Santos added. Sarah placed her hand on her 7-month pregnant belly and felt her daughter moving restlessly, as if sensing the tension and fear surrounding her impending birth. I'm sorry, baby girl, Sarah whispered. But we need to make sure your daddy faces the consequences of his choices before you arrive. You deserve better than what he's offering. The manhunt for Michael Sterling was about to become a confrontation between a sociopathic predator and the two pregnant women whose lives he tried to destroy. And Sarah Anderson was determined to make sure only one side walked away victorious. The abandoned warehouse in Portland's industrial district had been Michael Sterling's choice for the meeting location. Remote enough to avoid crowds, familiar enough that he knew all the exits, and dramatic enough to appeal to his sense of controlling the narrative. What Michael didn't know was that the warehouse was surrounded by FBI agents, local law enforcement, and surveillance equipment that could track his movements from 3 blocks away. Sarah Anderson sat in an unmarked van 200 yards from the warehouse, watching live video feeds while FBI technicians adjusted the wire she wore beneath her maternity dress. 7 months pregnant, wearing surveillance equipment, and preparing to confront the man who'd systematically destroyed her life. It wasn't how she'd imagined spending her Tuesday afternoon. Remember, Agent Santos said for the 4th time, your job is to keep him talking while we get into position. Don't try to be heroic. Don't try to get confessions on tape. Just keep him engaged until we can make the arrest. Jessica Cross sat beside Sarah in the van, looking pale and scared. The 24-year-old Instagram influencer who'd started this whole situation by throwing wine at a pregnant woman now found herself cooperating with federal agents to capture the man she'd thought she was in love with. I still can't believe he's done this before, Jessica said quietly. Rebecca, me. You! How many other women are there? Amanda Chen looked up from her laptop where she'd been coordinating with law enforcement databases across multiple states. At least 6 that I can document, Amanda replied grimly. Different cities, different names, same pattern. Find successful women, get them pregnant, drain their resources, disappear when the situation becomes complicated. 6 women, Sarah repeated. 6 pregnancies. That we know about, Michael Sterling is a serial predator who's been operating for at least 8 years. Sarah felt her daughter kick strongly, as if responding to her mother's stress and anger. In 2 months, Charlotte Anderson Sterling would be born into a world where her father was a fugitive from justice. Time to go, Agent Santos announced. Sarah, Jessica, remember the plan. Keep him talking. Don't put yourselves in danger. Trust the backup team. Sarah and Jessica walked toward the warehouse entrance, both wearing wires, both surrounded by invisible law enforcement protection, both carrying children conceived by a man who viewed pregnancy as a tool for manipulation rather than a miracle of life. Michael was waiting in the center of the empty warehouse space, wearing jeans and a hoodie that made him look younger and more vulnerable than the confident businessman who'd built his reputation on lies. Sarah, Michael said, genuine surprise in his voice. I didn't expect you to actually come. Jessica said you wanted to explain yourself. I thought I deserved to hear whatever story you're telling yourself about destroying our marriage. And I wanted to see if any part of the man I fell in love with actually existed, Jessica added, playing her part in their carefully rehearsed confrontation. Michael looked between them, clearly trying to assess whether this was genuine conflict or some kind of setup. You two are talking to each other now. We have a lot to discuss, Sarah replied. Like how you stole our savings to pay for her apartment. Like how you risked our house to fund your business while I budgeted grocery money. Like how you've apparently done this to other women in other cities. Michael's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like relief. So you know about Rebecca. We know about Rebecca, about Portland, about the pattern of behavior that you think makes you clever instead of criminal. Sarah, you have to understand. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. But people did get hurt. Rebecca lost her baby. I'm facing bankruptcy. Jessica's pregnant and unemployed. How exactly did you think this would end? Michael began pacing, his movements agitated and defensive. The business was supposed to work. The investments were supposed to pay off. I was supposed to be able to fix everything before anyone realized there were problems. By stealing money from your pregnant wife. By borrowing money from our joint resources to fund opportunities that would benefit our family. Sarah realized that Michael actually believed his own lies. In his mind, theft was borrowing, fraud was investment, abandonment was strategic planning. Michael, Jessica said, what about the baby? Our baby. That's why I called you. That's why we need to leave Portland. Start somewhere fresh. The 3 of us. We could make this work. The 3 of us, Sarah asked. You, me, Jessica, both babies. A unconventional family, but a family nonetheless. The suggestion was so delusional that Sarah momentarily forgot about the surveillance equipment and law enforcement backup. Michael, do you hear yourself? You're suggesting that your pregnant wife and your pregnant mistress raise children together while you hide from federal charges? I'm suggesting that we work together instead of letting lawyers and law enforcement turn this into something bigger than it needs to be. This is already bigger than it needs to be, Jessica said. You've stolen money, committed fraud, potentially endangered pregnancies with stress and financial instability. And you've done it before, Sarah added. To Rebecca, to however many other women we haven't found yet. Michael's pacing became more agitated. Rebecca was different. Rebecca couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't understand the business necessities. Rebecca lost her baby because of the stress you caused. That wasn't my fault. Whose fault was it? Sometimes things just happen. Sarah, sometimes situations become more complicated than anyone plans. Sarah realized that Michael was genuinely incapable of accepting responsibility for the consequences of his actions. In his mind, he was always the victim of circumstances rather than the creator of them. Michael, Sarah said quietly, I want you to look at me. Really look at me. Michael stopped pacing and focused on his wife. I'm 7 months pregnant with your daughter, who will grow up knowing that her father stole money from her mother, lied to everyone who trusted him, and abandoned his responsibilities the moment they became inconvenient. I'm not abandoning anyone. You filed for bankruptcy without telling me. You emptied our accounts without my knowledge. You bought plane tickets to leave the state while I discovered that our house was at risk of foreclosure. I was protecting our assets. From who? From legal complications that could have destroyed everything. Sarah felt a contraction, mild but noticeable. The stress of confronting Michael was affecting her pregnancy, just as it had affected Rebecca Martinez 2 years earlier. Michael, Sarah said, I need you to understand something. This conversation isn't about reconciliation or family planning or starting over somewhere else. What's it about? It's about justice. That's when FBI agents emerged from concealment positions throughout the warehouse, surrounding Michael Sterling with weapons drawn and arrest warrants ready. Michael Sterling, Agent Santos called out, you're under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, and flight to avoid prosecution. Michael looked around at the law enforcement officers, then at Sarah and Jessica, finally understanding that he'd been trapped. You set me up, he said to Sarah. We stopped you, Sarah corrected, from doing to other women what you did to us. As federal agents handcuffed Michael Sterling and read him his rights, Sarah felt another contraction and realized that the confrontation with her criminal husband had potentially triggered early labor. Agent Santos, Sarah called out, I think I need to get to a hospital. The manhunt was over, but Sarah Anderson's most important battle was just beginning. Portland General Hospital's maternity ward had never hosted a federal prisoner transfer. But at 3 in the morning on Wednesday, that's exactly what was happening in room 407. Sarah Anderson was in active labor, 2 weeks earlier than expected, while federal marshals maintained custody of Michael Sterling in the adjacent room where he was receiving treatment for injuries sustained during his arrest attempt to escape. This is the most surreal situation I've ever worked, muttered Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, Sarah's attending physician, as she monitored contractions while FBI agents coordinated security protocols in the hallway. Judge David Anderson had flown to Portland on the first available flight, arriving just as Sarah's labor accelerated beyond the point where transfer back to New York was possible. His granddaughter was going to be born in Portland, Oregon, the same city where Michael Sterling's previous victim had lost her baby from stress 2 years earlier. How are you holding up, sweetheart? David asked, holding Sarah's hand through another contraction. I keep thinking about Rebecca, Sarah replied. How she was alone when she lost her baby, how Michael just disappeared and left her with nothing. You're not alone, and Michael's not disappearing this time. Through the hospital room window, Sarah could see news vans gathering in the parking lot. The viral wine-throwing video had evolved into a national story about financial fraud and serial predatory behavior. Sarah's pregnancy had become a symbol of resilience, of women fighting back against men who viewed them as disposable. Amanda Chen arrived with legal documents and updates from the investigation. The FBI found evidence of at least 12 other victims across 8 states, Amanda reported. Michael's been operating this scheme for over a decade, targeting successful women, getting them pregnant, and disappearing with their resources. 12 women, Sarah said between contractions. 12 pregnancies. 8 miscarriages, Amanda added grimly. 4 births where the fathers disappeared completely. Your daughter is going to be the first child born to one of Michael's victims who actually got justice. Dr. Hayes checked Sarah's progress and announced that delivery was imminent. Sarah, your daughter's ready to meet the world. Are you ready to meet her? Sarah looked around the hospital room at her father, her best friend, the federal agents providing security, and realized that Charlotte Anderson Sterling was going to be born into the most unusual circumstances imaginable. But she was going to be born free from the lies and financial manipulation that had defined her parents' marriage. I'm ready. Charlotte Anderson Sterling was born at 4:17 a.m., weighing 6 pounds and 3 ounces, with perfect fingers, perfect toes, and her grandfather's determined chin. As Dr. Hayes placed the tiny baby on Sarah's chest, federal marshals were processing Michael Sterling's arraignment papers in the next room, ensuring that he would face justice for the crimes that had nearly destroyed his daughter's future. Hello, beautiful girl, Sarah whispered to her newborn daughter. You have no idea how many people fought to make sure you'd be born into a world where actions have consequences. Judge Anderson leaned over his granddaughter with tears in his eyes. She's perfect. Sarah, absolutely perfect. And safe, Sarah added. She's safe from everything her father represents. A soft knock on the door interrupted the family moment. Jessica Cross stood in the doorway, looking exhausted but determined. Sarah, I wanted to ask if I could meet her. If that's okay. Sarah looked at the young woman who'd thrown wine at her just 72 hours earlier, who'd helped expose Michael's crimes, who was carrying what might be Charlotte's half-sibling. Come in, Jessica. Jessica approached the bed carefully, looking down at the newborn baby with wonder. She's beautiful. Jessica, what are you going to do about your pregnancy? About everything. I'm keeping the baby, Jessica said firmly, and I'm testifying against Michael at his trial. I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. What about financial support? The FBI says they've recovered about 60% of the money Michael stole from various victims. It's not everything, but it's enough to start over. Sarah looked at Jessica and realized that they were both victims of the same predator. Both pregnant women who'd been manipulated and abandoned by a man who viewed children as tools for control rather than human beings deserving protection. Jessica, would you like to hold her? Are you sure? I'm sure. Jessica carefully took Charlotte in her arms, and Sarah saw something shift in the young woman's expression. The Instagram influencer who'd built her identity around getting attention from older men was looking at an innocent baby and understanding, perhaps for the first time, what unconditional love actually meant. I'm sorry, Jessica whispered, though Sarah wasn't sure if she was apologizing to Charlotte or to her. We're all going to be okay, Sarah replied. All of us. Our children are going to grow up knowing that women protect each other, that families come in different forms, and that justice is possible even when it seems impossible. Amanda appeared in the doorway with her laptop and a breaking news alert. Sarah, you need to see this. The news report showed Michael Sterling being transferred from the hospital to federal custody, but more importantly, it showed the FBI's press conference announcing the scope of their investigation. This case represents one of the most extensive patterns of financial and emotional abuse targeting pregnant women that federal authorities have ever prosecuted. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos announced to the media, "The victim cooperation and evidence gathering in this case will serve as a model for similar investigations nationwide." Sarah looked down at her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully in Jessica's arms, completely unaware that she'd been born into the middle of a federal criminal case that would reshape how law enforcement handles financial abuse of pregnant women. Charlotte, Sarah said quietly, your first day of life, you helped change the world. Not bad for someone who's only 6 hours old. Judge Anderson smiled at his daughter and granddaughter, thinking about how sometimes the worst moments in life created the foundation for the most important changes. Sarah Anderson had gone from viral humiliation to federal witness to new mother in less than 72 hours. But more importantly, she'd gone from victim to survivor to someone who would ensure that other women didn't have to face what she'd faced alone. Charlotte Anderson Sterling was going to grow up in a world where her mother had fought for justice and won. The Manhattan courthouse was packed with reporters, federal prosecutors, and representatives from 12 different states as United States v. Michael Sterling concluded its final day of testimony. Sarah Anderson, now Sarah Anderson Hayes, after legally reclaiming her maiden name, sat in the front row holding 13-month-old Charlotte, who was more interested in her toy blocks than the historic sentencing taking place 20 feet away. Judge Patricia Morrison, who had been specially assigned to handle the complex multi-state fraud case, reviewed the evidence that had taken federal investigators 8 months to fully document. Mr. Sterling, Judge Morrison addressed the defendant, in 30 years on the federal bench, I have never seen a case involving such systematic, calculated abuse of trust, targeting vulnerable women. Michael Sterling, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and looking 20 years older than he had during his wine-throwing viral video appearance, stood motionless as the judge continued. 12 women across 8 states, over $2 million in documented financial fraud, 6 stress-induced miscarriages directly attributable to your abandonment and financial manipulation. Sarah felt Charlotte kick her legs happily, completely oblivious to the fact that her father was about to be sentenced to federal prison for crimes that had nearly destroyed her chance at a stable life. The evidence shows a pattern of behavior spanning 12 years, targeting successful women in their late 20s and early 30s, systematically draining their financial resources while creating emotional dependence through pregnancy. In the gallery behind Sarah, Rebecca Martinez sat with her 2-year-old son, a child conceived with a different partner 2 years after Michael's abandonment, a symbol of her recovery and resilience. 8 other victims had traveled to New York for the sentencing, creating a community of women who'd survived Michael's manipulation. Jessica Cross sat in the second row, holding her 7-month-old daughter Emma. The DNA test had confirmed Michael's paternity, but Jessica had made it clear that she wanted no relationship with him beyond the court-ordered child support that would be garnered from his future earnings, if any. Your crimes go beyond financial fraud, Judge Morrison continued. You systematically targeted women during pregnancy, the most vulnerable time in their lives, and used their condition as leverage for emotional and financial manipulation. Amanda Chen, who'd won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on Michael's crimes, sat with her laptop documenting every word of the sentencing for her upcoming book about the case. The impact statements from your victims describe not just financial hardship, but lasting trauma related to trust, intimacy, and their ability to form healthy relationships. Judge David Anderson, who'd been granted special permission to observe the federal sentencing, watched with grim satisfaction as justice was finally served for his daughter and granddaughter. Mr. Sterling, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? Michael Sterling looked around the courtroom at the women whose lives he'd nearly destroyed, at the children who would grow up knowing their biological father was a federal prisoner, at the law enforcement officials who'd spent months documenting his crimes. Your Honor, Michael said, his voice barely audible. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. Intention is irrelevant when the harm is systematic and ongoing, Judge Morrison replied sharply. You made conscious choices for over a decade to target vulnerable women and exploit their trust. Sarah felt Charlotte reach for her necklace, a gift from her father engraved with the date of Michael's arrest, the day her daughter was born and justice began. Michael Sterling, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised probation. You will pay restitution in the amount of $2.3 million to be distributed among your victims according to documented losses. The gallery erupted in quiet applause from the victims and their families. 15 years wasn't enough to undo the damage Michael had caused, but it was enough to ensure that he couldn't victimize other women during his prime predatory years. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, you are prohibited from accessing social media, dating applications, or investment platforms during your probation period. Any future romantic relationships must be disclosed to your probation officer, and you are required to inform potential partners of your criminal history. Sarah looked down at Charlotte, who was babbling happily and trying to grab the courtroom's ceiling lights, completely unaware that her future had just been secured by the justice system. As federal marshals led Michael Sterling away to begin his 15-year sentence, Sarah felt closure she hadn't expected. The viral video that had humiliated her 18 months earlier had ultimately led to justice for 12 women and protection for countless others who might have become Michael's future targets. Outside the courthouse, Sarah faced a crowd of reporters and cameras, holding Charlotte while Amanda and Jessica flanked her for moral support. Mrs. Anderson Hayes, called a reporter from CNN. What would you say to other women who might be in similar situations? Sarah looked at the cameras, thinking about the millions of people who'd watched her humiliation go viral, who'd followed her story through federal investigation, manhunt, and trial. I'd say that viral moments can become justice moments, Sarah replied. That public accountability works when people refuse to let predators hide behind wealth and social status. What's next for you and Charlotte? Sarah smiled, bouncing her daughter gently. Charlotte and I are moving back to my father's house while I finish law school. I'm planning to specialize in family law, specifically financial abuse cases. Any message for Michael Sterling? Sarah considered the question carefully, looking at Charlotte, who was reaching toward the cameras with curious fingers. I hope that someday he understands the damage he caused, not just financially but emotionally. These children deserve better than what he offered. As the press conference concluded, Sarah walked away from the Manhattan courthouse, carrying her daughter toward a future built on truth instead of lies, financial security instead of theft, and justice instead of abandonment. Charlotte Anderson Hayes would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for justice and won, that communities of women could overcome individual predators, and that viral videos could sometimes change the world for the better. The wine-throwing incident that had humiliated Sarah Anderson had ultimately become the catalyst for one of the most comprehensive financial fraud prosecutions in federal history. And sometimes, Sarah reflected as she strapped Charlotte into her car seat, that's exactly how justice works. One viral video, one investigation, and one determined community at a time. Charlotte babbled happily as they drove through Manhattan traffic, completely unaware that her first year of life had helped change federal law enforcement approaches to financial abuse of pregnant women. But she would know someday, and she would understand that her mother had made sure that other children wouldn't grow up with fathers who viewed pregnancy as weakness to exploit rather than life to protect. The story that began with humiliation had ended with justice, and Charlotte Anderson Hayes would grow up in a world made safer by her mother's courage to turn viral shame into viral change. Sarah Anderson's story proves that sometimes our worst moments become our most powerful ones. What started as viral humiliation became federal justice for 12 women and protection for countless others. If this story moved you, if it made you think about justice, resilience, or the power of community support, show me by hitting that like button. Your engagement tells me you want more real stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever witnessed someone's public moment become a catalyst for real change? Share this video with someone who needs to know that justice is possible, even when it seems impossible. And if you're new here, subscribe and ring that notification bell, because every week I bring you stories that matter. Stories about courage, consequences, and how ordinary people create extraordinary change. These are the stories that remind us why truth always finds a way to surface, especially in our connected world. Remember, your story matters too. Sometimes the most important changes start with one person refusing to stay silent. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.